2, 1.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. We're here for the scoping session for the Sierra Point Towers, or Sierra Point Hotel and Life Science Project Environmental Impact Report. Welcome again. My name is Matthew Wiswa. I'm a senior planner with LSA. We're the city's consultant for environmental review of the proposed project. So this first slide just lists the topics that I'll cover tonight. Try to be as brief as I can, including the purpose of the scoping session, an overview of the proposed project, and the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, topics that will be addressed in the Comprehensive Environmental Impact Report, or EIR, that will be prepared to evaluate the environmental impacts of the project, and an overview of the environmental review process and schedule. And then after that, we'll move ahead with public comment. So the purpose of the scoping session tonight is to engage interested parties early on in the environmental review process and to get your thoughts on the topics that should be considered in the EIR. The merits of the project are not being considered tonight, so comments should focus on the range of environmental topics to be considered, any specific issues of concern related to environmental impacts or environmental topics, the approach and methods used in the analysis, and potential mitigation measures or alternatives that you think should be considered. So first, a brief overview of the project site itself. The site is located at 9000 Marina Boulevard on the Sierra Point Peninsula at the southern end of the city. The approximately 6-acre site is currently undeveloped and located immediately adjacent to the proposed Sierra Point Towers project to the west, the Shore project to the south, and parking lots for the marina to the north and east. The proposed project itself would result in construction of 2 new buildings on top of a shared parking podium. The hotel building, which would be located on the northern half of the site, would be approximately 200 feet in height and would contain 608 guest rooms. The second building would be a life science office building, which would be located on the southern half of the site and would contain approximately 658,000 square feet of floor area, split evenly between research and development and office space. The shared parking podium would include 1 below grade level and contain a total of approximately 1,200 parking spaces. On top of the parking podium would be a central open space, which would include approximately 60,000 square feet of publicly accessible space. We're currently working to define the project for CEQA purposes, so there may be some refinements that may be reflected in the EIR if needed. I'd like to note that the environmental analysis must evaluate the impacts of the project as it is proposed in the project sponsor's application. So a little bit of a background on CEQA. CEQA requires that lead agencies that approve projects to identify environmental impacts associated with those projects and then either avoid or mitigate those impacts. CEQA documents are prepared to inform decision makers so that they can look at the potential environmental impacts that are identified and make informed decisions about a project. Again, that means the merits are not considered in the CEQA process and that environmental review does not include a recommendation as to whether a project should be approved or not. Based on a preliminary review of the project application materials, the city has determined that an EIR will be prepared and the purpose of scoping is to inform the EIR analysis. So this slide provides a basic overview of how projects are evaluated under CEQA. This process is used to evaluate each of the 20 topics required by the state CEQA guidelines. For most projects, including this one, baseline conditions are generally those that exist at the time the NOP was published. So the NOP, or the Notice of Preparation, was published just a few weeks ago. So the baseline is essentially the conditions as they exist on the project site today in early 2023. And that's what we're using to compare the effects of the proposed project to. The significance thresholds will be based on the CEQA guidelines, which are established by the state, as well as the applicable local and regional policies. The effects of the project will then be compared to the baseline conditions to determine the potential impacts. Cumulative impacts will also be addressed. And I'd like to point out that the focus of the analysis is on direct physical changes to the environment, and economic and social changes are not considered in a project level environmental review. So because of the location, size, and scale of the project, it was determined that a comprehensive EIR would be required and that it look at the full range of CEQA topics, most of which are shown on this slide here. For the benefit of those that may be listening, these topics are aesthetics, air quality, cultural and tribal cultural resources, biological resources, energy, geology and soils, greenhouse gas emissions, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, land use planning, noise, population housing, public services and recreation, transportation, and utilities and service systems. Additional topics include agriculture, mineral resources, and wildfire. These topics are addressed at the appropriate level of detail, but are not required to require a full evaluation like the other topics shown in this slide. At this point, our work on the EIR is really just getting underway as we're coordinating closely with the city to fully and conservatively define the project for the purposes of the CEQA analysis and be sure that we have all the information necessary that we need in order to conduct the analysis. Again, early on in the process, and we have not really initiated the EIR analyses. Technical studies will be prepared for the topics of air quality, energy, geology and soils, greenhouse gas emissions, hazards, noise, transportation, and infrastructure, including water supply. Visual simulations that depict before and after conditions of the project will also be prepared. And all of these technical analyses and evaluations will inform the EIR analysis. And finally, that square on the bottom right there, the EIR is required to evaluate a reasonable range of alternatives. The alternatives should attain most of the basic objectives of the project, which will be defined as part of the project, and should avoid or substantially lessen any significant effects of the project. The alternatives will be developed after the impacts of the project are identified and with any input received during this NOP comment period. A no project alternative will be considered, which is required by CEQA. Other alternatives really depend on the potential impacts of the project, and if any members of the public or other interested parties have ideas for potential alternatives they would like to see analyzed, we would certainly welcome hearing about those tonight or in your written comments. So this slide shows the opportunities for public comment on the EIR, including during public meetings and in writing. We're currently in that first teal diamond on the top right, the scoping of environmental issues. The remaining diamonds are future opportunities to comment, which include at least 2 more public hearings, which I'll talk about in a minute. There may also be other opportunities at these or other future meetings to comment on the merits of the project as well. So this slide shows the overall schedule anticipated for the environmental review process. On January 23rd, the city issued the notice of preparation, notifying interested parties and responsible agencies that an EIR will be prepared. The standard 30-day comment period ends on February 22nd. During this time, interested parties are encouraged to submit comments in writing on the scope of the EIR. And then again, as I said, tonight is also an opportunity to provide verbal comments. Over the next several months, we'll prepare the EIR, and the draft EIR is expected to be published sometime in late spring this year. After the EIR is published, there'll be a 45-day public comment period. During those 45 days, interested parties will have an opportunity to review the EIR and submit comments to the city. The city will also hold a public hearing on the draft EIR during the 45-day comment period, and at that time, the public can also provide verbal or written comments. After the close of the comment period, we'll then prepare written responses to each substantive comment received on the adequacy of the EIR and what's called a response to comments document. The response to comments document will also include any revisions to the draft EIR if any are necessary. And together, the draft EIR and the response to comments document constitute the final EIR. The final EIR will be published and available for review a minimum of 10 days before any hearings are held. Once the final EIR is complete, the city will consider certification of the EIR, and after that, we'll consider approval of the project as a separate action. The public, of course, may attend any of these meetings and hearings and provide comments on the EIR. And as you can see, the EIR is currently anticipated, certification is currently anticipated in early fall. So this comment shows the details for how you can access the webinar or call in to make comments, and we'll keep it up throughout the public comment portion of this meeting. The call-in number is 1-669-900-9128, and you will enter *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself after your call. Again, the purpose of this meeting is to engage the public early on in the environmental review process and to get your thoughts on the topics that should be evaluated in the EIR. Tonight's not about the scale of or the size of the project, proposed uses, the designs, or any of the project elements or the merits. Those are discussed at separate meetings. Our role tonight is really to listen to your concerns and ideas. So tonight we'll be taking detailed notes to be sure that we consider each of your comments in the EIR, but we would also encourage you to submit comments in writing. Again, that's prior to Wednesday, February 22nd at 5 p.m. And the information on this slide shows the contact information for the city. And we'll put this slide back up at the end of the public comment. This can also be found on the city's website and NOP. And I realize that the slide says the 23rd, but it's actually the 22nd. And with that, we can take any public comments. Thank you. And just again, if you're attending on Zoom, please use the raise hand feature if you'd like to submit a public comment. We'll give it just another minute or two to see if there are any public commenters, and if not, we'll go ahead and adjourn our meeting. All righty, seeing as how there are no public comments, we'll go ahead and adjourn. I'd just like to remind everyone that comments can be submitted in writing to Dara Sanders. Her contact information is here on the screen, but I'll also read out her email address just in case there's anyone listening. That's dsanders, DSANDERS @brisbaneca.org. And we would invite your comments before 5 p.m. on February 22nd. And with that, thank you.